Hello, welcome to WD18, the Watford fan channel. My name is Jacob Coleshaw, joined by, as always, Charlie Zazera, and special guest today, Mr. Andrew French, the Watford Observer's very own. We've got Andrew on today. We were just discussing how we haven't brought Andrew on to talk about yesterday as a whole. It's more about the interview that Andrew did with new Watford technical director Ben Manga, and everything that was said with Ben. Get the kind of the insight on Ben as a man and what he said to Andrew, and get a feeling of what he's like. Andrew, first off, mate, thank you so much for coming on. How are you getting on? How are you feeling? Have you recovered from Hull away yesterday?
Yeah. I got a bit of a knock for it yesterday because I wrote that it wasn't that bad, and I didn't think it was. But then I'm comparing it to Cardiff at home, Huddersfield at home, Luton away. I think you have to put things in context. If we'd have put in a performance like we did they would have gone on to score 2, 3, 4, 5. So in that respect, at least there was a little bit of fight there, but it wasn't good. And I really felt for the fans in the away end because that's a long journey. And anyone who's going to Sunderland on Saturday, I think we should form a guard of honour and shake their hands on the way out and on the way back because that is a long way. That is a long way to go. But I know that people at the club appreciate it, even if sometimes that you see players disappearing down the tunnel, doing their best sprint of the match to get off. There are key people there who understand that these fans are giving their time and money up. So I certainly respect it. And I do feel like going around and hanging around the turnstiles at the away end on Saturday, just shake a few hands and also check that people are all right, because you've got to be, you're bordering on mad. But good luck to them. Good luck.
Sam did his match reaction yesterday, and there was a few comments saying, "Sam, we can tell it's taken out of you by the fact you've grown a beard from the start to the end of the season."
I'm very fortunate. I'm paid to go up to watch the games, and I'm lucky enough. I usually travel up. Long it takes to get there. I know how long it takes to get home. I know the money that's involved, and I know it can wreck your weekend. Watch a really poor performance, but. Like I've said a lot of times, what we have to remember is that the fans of the club were there before the people that are running the club now, and they'll be there after the people that run the club now. So even in those moments of madness and high costs, just remember that, you are carrying the baton for everybody else. And, in years to come, you can look back and say, well, I did my bit that season, even if the players didn't always turn up.
Yeah, well said. Well said. Charlie, how are you getting on, mate? You okay?
Yeah, good. Busy afternoon watching football. Watched the girls unfortunately lose the cup final. That was a gutter. That really good performance. It was a brilliant game. And had a couple of good chances to go on and win it. Just couldn't get that clear-cut chance. So well done to them. I know they've got another big game. Is it on Thursday against Oxford at the Vic?
Yeah.
So they've had a stunning season. So well done everyone who travelled there. Well done, and hopefully we can get as many people at Vicarage Road to support them, because they've still got a chance to go up if they beat Oxford. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, the women's team has been phenomenal this season, and credit to everyone involved. As I said, today we're going to be talking about Mr. Ben Manga, and obviously he's came into Watford 6 months ago. Has kind of been, I think it's fair to say, on the back seat. We've seen him at away games. You've seen him kind of in the background. Hasn't really, bar a couple of statements, had a lot of influence so far. But we wanted to get Andrew's insight. He spoke to the man himself at the training ground, and if you have any questions for Andrew, then please let us know in the live chat below. There's a couple already that are coming in. Before we get to those, Andrew, just firstly, what was your initial impressions of Ben coming in? I know you did a similar interview of Rob when he came in, and you spoke really highly of Rob and the impression that he gave off. In terms of Ben Manga, what impression did he give to you?
Well, that wasn't the first time I'd met him. So I'd seen him at games. And if you remember back in January when I did the transfer deadline day from the training ground, I sat chatting with him and Helena Costa for a while. And I've met Raphael as well. So I knew all three of them, not in any great detail, but they knew me and I knew them.
Who's Raphael? Sorry?
Raphael is along with Helena, they're his sort of two right-hand people that he's worked with. So Raphael, I think he's known since his playing days. Obviously a very close friend, and is involved, alongside Helena in the sort of the setting up of the scouting network and the overseeing of it. So, and I'd asked about talking to Ben when he first joined, and the message came back. He just wanted to get his feet under the table and get a feel for the place, which I thought was, totally understandable. So I saw him last Tuesday, and he was excellent. Very patient. Was in no rush at all. Never checked his watch. The only thing he said he didn't really want to talk about was sort of this season's performances and players, because he didn't feel it was right to comment on other people's work because he's not really been involved. Which I think it's very hard for him to say anything that wouldn't be seen as critical or would be giving clues to what he thinks about certain as involved as he will be going forward. Beyond that, it was excellent. I found him very measured, very considered, thought about his answers, had a sense of humour, amazing linguistic skills. I mean, the interview was done. So I was talking, obviously, in English. That's the only language I know. The translator was then translating it into Spanish. Ben would then answer in Spanish, although sometimes dip into German. And then it came back to me in English. But every now and then he would understand a bit in English and want to say something in English. So it's quite a long process when you do it that way. But it was great because he would, if he wanted to give a long answer, he broke it down into chunks. And he, as I say, he was very, very thoughtful, very considered, very measured. I thought very honest. But as he said, I think I've just put the last piece up. You get judged on what you do, not what you say. And he really just wants to crack on now. And I think, once these 2 games are out of the way, I think we'll then see him crack on and we'll start to see his influence coming to bear a bit more. But yeah, as a person, impressive, confident, likable. I'm always slightly reserved because I remember back to last summer when in the same sort of situation, I was thinking how Rob could be the man to take it forward. And then when Bilic came in, I was hoping he would be the one, and then Wilder. So, you do at Watford get used to having your hopes built up. It's a bit like a game of Jenga. You put them there and then someone pulls the brick away further down and it all collapses. But you can only hope that this time change means change, and it means positive change. So let's see. But yeah, first impressions were good guy, knows his stuff, and confident in his own abilities.
Yeah, really.
Sorry, mate. My first question, and before you answer, we'll obviously put the link in to the Watford Reserver so people can read all of it. So let us know about details, because I know there's a small fee to kind of be a subscriber, so we want to encourage that. But my first question is, what exactly is Ben Manga's role and responsibility? I'm not sure if when he first joined the club said he was a sporting director, and recently it's changed to a technical director. To be honest, there's probably not much difference. But what did he tell you is his roles and his exact responsibilities are?
Sort of hiring and supporting of the head coach, and then the moves in and out of the players. So beyond that, he would be looking at the academy, the overall off-field structure. I mean, he used the word sort of, it's interesting because I think his job title is technical director. But he would talk about working in all sporting areas. I don't get too hung up on job titles, sporting director, technical director. They're just names. I think he will look at everything at the training ground on a macro level, and then where he needs to on a micro level. So, if he thinks the academy is structured and set up in the right way, he'll leave it alone. If he thinks it needs some work, he'll get in there and help out. The impression I got was, he obviously can't do everything. So he's going to focus on the areas that he thinks are most important. And, one that he spoke about a lot was the stability in managers. So, again, let's hope that that's the case, because we don't really want to be going through 3 a season. And he said that he'd had conversations with the owner about that before he joined, which sort of suggested to me that, that he wouldn't have come here if he thought that it was going to be a hamster wheel again next season. But who knows? That's something he's going to have to find out. None of us know what the owner's going to do next. Ben's obviously got his ideas on stability. He's got his ideas on transfers, the sort of players he wants here. He made it very clear he didn't want players who didn't want to be here. So, if someone really wants to go, he's not going to stand in their way. He talked about people who he didn't want players who were here physically but not mentally, which I think, we can all name a few of those that have been around the last couple of seasons. He talked about attitude over ability. So, he'd rather have players who are really tuned in and want to do it the right way, even if they're not the most gifted players in the world. I mean, ideally you get both, but he said that you often see a lot of players who've got ability but don't sort of fulfill their potential because they haven't got the right attitude. Whereas you often see players who may not be the most gifted but go on to good things because they put a shift in. So listening to him, it's almost like he's sort of gone in and had a sort of an overarching look at the training ground. That's the areas that he would be involved in. So the first team, the academy, the scouting, the medical side of things, the physios. He will have a look with his team. So people like Helena Costa and Raphael, and see where he thinks he can make the most difference, and then start to do that. And I think it's good that he's taken these first 6 months to almost take a step back rather than wading in straight away. He's taken a step back to have a look and see it operate, watch it, meet with people. Obviously, he travels to games. I see him down at Kings Langley at under-21s games. So he's been and seen everything. And I think that is a wise move. There's often a temptation, not just in football, any job, is to go in and go, I know what's best, when you've never actually seen it running. So it all points towards a really good and measured approach from a man who's got quite a wide remit, but has made it clear he can't fix everything at once. So he's going to focus on the things that he thinks are most important.
So one of the questions I had, Andrew, was about that influence so far. So as you mentioned, he's taken a bit of time to get his feet under the table. It's been 6 months since he officially joined. Now, a lot of people have already started to draw attention to the January transfer window and himself and Helena Costa and what they've brought in, and Costa, for example, using her contacts to bring in a Rouge. And I think Ferreira was recommended by her from what we've read. Anyway, so has there been little to no influence from his side? Has there been anything at all that he's actually already implemented? Do we know what he's done so far up to this point? Or is it very much just been taking a step back and looking at the bigger picture?
Well, he definitely had some input into the January transfer window, and those two that you mentioned, Rouge and Ferreira, quite clearly were either directly people that he scouted or recommendations from people that he knew. But then flip it over, he didn't have any input into Porteous or Hoyt. So, but then you have to remember he only joined in December. So basically, I think he joined on December the 22nd, and the window opened on January the 1st. So he didn't have a lot of time. He's all like, I don't know the ins and outs of what he does every day, but he's sort of omnipresent. He's always at the training ground. He's at away games. He's at under 21 games. He's there. He's watching. He's learning. I know he's meeting with people. People that I talk to at the training ground about meetings, and he sits in on other meetings. It's almost like in the sort of world of everyday work, when you take a reasonably senior position, you have that handover where the other person's left you a load of notes, and you spend the first few weeks looking through their notes and going and meeting people. And football is very different, but that's how it feels it's been with him, is to go in and see how things operate, talk to the people already there, use his own eyes and ears to draw opinions. And I think, once this season's out of the way, we'll start to see him being more to the fore of operations. And I know in one of the pieces he said that he hasn't spoken to potential head coaches, and people were quite surprised by that. I think reading between the lines that, that doesn't mean he hasn't looked at potential head coaches, or he hasn't sounded out other people about whether someone's a good coach. I think he's telling the truth, and that he maybe hasn't met anybody. But also you have to bear in mind, if we're potentially considering someone who's already in a job, it wouldn't be very good to be seen to be meeting with them right now, because we got into a bit of trouble with that with Rob Edwards, where the owner of Forest Green wasn't particularly amused that we were talking to him before the season was out. So I think I don't think he's lying in as much as he has met people. He's saying he hasn't. I'm sure he's done his diligence, and I'm sure he's got a list of people that one way or another he's checked up on or thinks are right. But, come whenever it is, May the 9th, when the season's over, that's when I think we'll start to see him coming to the fore a bit more.
Do you think, obviously, you've been in touch with Chris Wilder quite a lot. He's been working with Chris. I've heard good things in terms of their relationship. Do you think there's any chance that Chris could be appointed the head coach role going on to next season?
Personally, I'd be surprised, because I think someone like Ben, when they come in, would want their own person there. It would be very hard for him to talk about, the changes he wants to make if the person that he's asking to make those changes isn't someone he's appointed himself. You know, I know Chris would take the job, but I'm sure, you know, there would also be, you know, Chris, having done the job for a few weeks, would also have his own conditions because he's seen things, and although they're not at odds, his way of thinking about going forward may be slightly different to what Ben thinks. So I'm not saying I don't know. So let me say that straight away. I don't know who's going to be head coach next season, but if you're asking for my opinion, then if you bring in someone at the level that Ben Manga is and give them the remit he's been given, if it were Chris Wilder, it would have to be because Ben wanted it to be. Does that make sense? I don't think he's going to be told, well, just leave that bloke there and give him another contract. Because if that were the case, we'd have given Chris Wilder 18 months. We gave him 11 games. So I think it's more likely that Ben would want his own person. Not that, as I say, not that I've got any clue at all, but just from listening to him and sort of getting the vibe from around the places, I think it'll be a different person next season.
And just on the head coach, I can't remember what day you mentioned, but obviously we're not getting the playoffs. That's been confirmed. Do you think that process will start fairly soon? I mean, it feels like there's such a massive job to do in terms of appointing a head coach, summer recruitment in and out. Do you not think it would be wise to start that now? Do you think that's likely, or do you think they'll just try and do a clean break, end the season, and have a bit of time?
I don't. It really depends on who they're looking to appoint. Like I say, if it's somebody who's in a job, then it would be difficult to appoint them now because they've obviously still got, you know, potentially 2 games. I don't even know what country these people are coming from that we're potentially looking at. I'd like to think, and it would make sense that, you know, if we're not going to give the job to Chris, then once the season is finished, whoever we are going to appoint gets in pretty quickly, because what that'd be early May. Players will be off then, come back in sort of late June. That's, you know, if you really want to get ahead of the curve and use our scouting network, then you want to be bringing players in before anybody else has a chance to, you know, snap them up. And whoever this person may be, even if they've been identified by Ben and he knows of them and he understands how they work, they're going to need time to get themselves onto the same page. I think that's one thing that we'll benefit from. If the manager is a Ben Manga selection, then it will obviously be someone who he thinks can work the way that he wants them to work. So it's not like we're hoisting someone upon Manga that he's never thought about before, or similarly that you know, the manager's not going to come here and go, I didn't know we had a technical director. The two of them are going to be on the same page. But you're right. I think, you know, it would seem a bit odd if we didn't know who the next head coach was before, you know, the end of May. Otherwise, we are wasting time, because there is going to be a lot of turnover. I think there is going to be a lot of change, and the quicker you can do that, the less painful it is, and the more time it gives people to understand what next season is going to look like. So I can't see it that we're going to appoint someone before the Stoke game. I'd be surprised. I don't see the benefit of that. You know, if we're going, you know, also if with the brush of the next 2 games. I think it would make sense, not that I know, but I think it would make sense that as soon as we finish the Stoke game, very quickly we have an idea of who the head coach is and you know, what things are going to look like. So that person has then got the whole summer to start to bring their influence and work with Manga and the other people at the club, so that when the new season starts, when we get into pre-season, we've got things in place.
Sorry, Jacob, I'm just jumping in with one last head coach question. Obviously, we got rumoured with Francesco Varioli. I actually messaged his agent just kind of out of curiosity, and he sent me a link to the Trabzonspor saying they're interested. Just give us a bit of an insight, kind of if Ben said anything about him and kind of how agents work in potentially pushing their clients' names in certain areas.
Yeah, that was one I asked him about, because obviously that link was the one that led to Watford putting the statement out that Chris wouldn't be going before the end of the season, which I know some people thought was odd. You know, back in my PR days, I would certainly have advised the same thing, because you have to nip that sort of thing in the bud. It doesn't do anybody any good to be talking about the next person before the one that's incumbent has even gone anywhere. So when I asked him about that, he was quite clear, Ben, that, you know, no, I've not had a meeting with him. No, I've not had a discussion with him. And he then went on to say, look, you know, at this time of year, when you're in the job that he's in, you will get lots of calls from agents of players and also agents of coaches. and they'll say, look, I don't know if you're thinking of changing manager, but my client would be very interested. And he said, if you say thanks very much, I'll bear that in mind. Sort of the right to then say to people, oh, Watford are interested in my client, because we haven't said no. And as Ben said, I'm not going to say no because I'm not going to rule anybody out. But by not saying no doesn't mean I've said yes. And he said the same with players. And I've got experience of that from my days at Watford and Charlton, where the manager would say at the time, look, I've had a call about this player. I've not said no, but you can rest assured that people think we're going to buy him or we're going to sell him or whatever. Ben was pretty clear on that. Yeah, there are people I'm interested in, but just because people print it, it's not fact. And he said he was quite clear. He said that he would rather deal with people directly. So even if an agent contacts him, he would not say to the agent much more than, I'd like to talk to your client, and then have the conversation with the client rather than through the agent. There was a definite message there that he wants to reduce the use of agents in all areas, and particularly deal with agents on our terms rather than the other way around. I got the impression that he felt that a lot of the time agents came to clubs with players, a good player, and what he wants to do is the other way around. Is I'm looking for a good player. Your client is the one I'd like to talk to him. So that the relationship is a bit more of us in control of it. But generally, he wants to use a scouting network more than agents, and doesn't want to pay agents fees. And he said that there will be times we use agents. Obviously, players have got agents. You have to do deals that involve an agent. And there may be times where if we want the player, the agent may have a relationship with the owner of the club that means we can get it a bit cheaper. But what he wanted to get away from was if we were looking for a left back, that rather than going to scouting network, we would just send a message out to agents saying, have you got a left back on your books? And we'd get hundreds of names come back. He said that really isn't the way he wants to operate. He wants it to be that we've identified a player we want, and at that point we then go to the agent and say we'd like to sign or talk about signing your player, so that it's us that owns that relationship rather than the agent feeling like they can just I won't use the phrase, but someone talks about the bucket of bilge involving a particular agent, which I do think it does feel a bit like that sometimes, where it's a bit like going down to the supermarket when they've got the food reduced, the stuff that's going out of date, and you're looking for something for dinner, and you end up having 2 or 3 things that you didn't really fancy, but because they were half price and they put them in the reduced aisle, you thought it was a good deal. He wants it to be the other way around. He wants to be owning that relationship with agents rather than having agents just palming their players off onto us. So that was a very long-winded way of saying, yes, I do think that things will happen quite quickly, and it will be on Manga's terms. And he did talk about there will be a lot of change, and I think that's one positive change, is that he wants to be in charge of how we deal with agents, whether that be for managers or players, rather than the other way around.
You do find some gems in the reduced section, though. That has to be said. I mean, sometimes, and Tesco's particularly, great range.
Emmanuel Dennis.
Yeah, well, look, I'm not knocking. I wouldn't say that any player that's been brought to the club by any agent is, there's good ones and bad ones. I just think from what Manga was saying was that in the past, the way we've tended to operate is that, we have, rather than having a load of scouts, we have access to a lot of agents, and the message goes out that we're looking for a player in a certain position, and they just go down their list of players and say, I've got this one, this one, this one, and this one would be the best for you. And I think Ben said something, that when an agent recommends a player to you, you have to have in the back of your mind, is that because the agent thinks it's the right player for the club, or is that because the agent thinks that's the one I'm going to get the most money from? It's a bit like when you go and buy a second-hand car. Is that really the car I want, or is that the one that the dealer's getting the most commission on? And I found that really refreshing. When he said, it actually made me laugh, because I didn't actually mention any names when we were talking about agents, but I started talking about, have you got to use a particular agent? And Ben's obviously got a grasp of English, and he sort of smiled and leant back in the chair and said something in Spanish, and that's when we got the quote, I don't have to use any particular agent. And if I was told I had to do something with a particular agent and I didn't think it was right, I'd clear my desk and go back to Germany. And I found that encouraging. Now, I'm sure there's some fans who think that, bearing in mind how we work, he might be clearing his desk before the end of May. I'd like to think not. I'd like to think that, that was those conversations have already been had, and that, you know, Ben and the owner have had those conversations, that the owner is under no illusions that if he tries to force Manga down a certain route, that Manga won't take it. But these things are all going to be revealed, I'm sure, once we do our first signing or once we try and appoint our first manager. But I was encouraged by the fact that he wasn't overly keen on using agents, and there was a way he would use them, and it wouldn't be in you know, the way we referred to, whether we go to them and say, look, I'm desperate, have you got a player that's placed in this position? Because you are then in the hands of the agents. It's far better to go to an agent and say, I understand you represent this player, we scouted him, we like him, could we talk to you? That is the club owning the relationship, and that is the way that most clubs tend to work.
Yeah, for sure. We want to get on some questions in the live chat, if that's all right, Andrew. We're just going to fire some over, and some of them have been, there's actually quite a lot that are kind of repeating themselves here. And one of the big ones actually is the butterfly man himself, Cristiano Girata. What is the impact of Ben coming in on his role? Because there was rumours that he would be leaving. There was rumours that his role's changed. Would you be able to just clarify what that means with Manga coming in for him? Because it seems like, has his role changed? We don't know.
If I knew what the difference was between a technical director and money out of that, as I understand it, and from what I see of it, the role that Girata does is more administrative. So it would be if in the past we wanted to sign a player and there was an agent involved, at that point Girata would then work with the agent to see the deal through, sort the paperwork out. I never got the impression that Girata was a player finder. I always had the impression that because we were working with agents, we needed someone who sat between the club and the agent to oversee the paperwork, make sure it happened. So in that respect, you could see how Manga and Girata would work together. But then if we're going to use a scouting network that's managed by Manga, it's hard to see why you would need that Girata.
Ooh, have we lost
Andrew? Have we lost him?
So it's just frozen for a second. We'll see if he comes.
The Wi-Fi in the French household's gone down.
Oh, I know. Unbelievable. We will get on to the rest of your questions in just a moment when Andrew regains his connection. Charlie, just so far from what Andrew's been saying. Oh, is Andrew back?
Yeah, sorry, did you lose me there?
No, just out a little bit. Sorry, you were just saying about Girata, and you was talking about his role, that he was signing the contracts and getting those deals over the line, and then it kind of cut out.
Yeah, no, I was just saying, I think the other thing to bear in mind is that, like footballers, most of the football staff are on contracts, so it's not like they're on open-ended arrangements. I don't know what length of contract someone like Girata has, but he's been here a few years now, and you know, in the past we've had different people in that role. It could well be that there is a natural split that's about to happen, and you know, that come next season we don't have Girata around, not because you know that there's any fallout, just because naturally his contracts come to an end and he drifts off and goes somewhere else. It's at the moment there is demarcation, and Cristiano is more of, as I said, administrative person and supports the manager in terms, you know, it doesn't, you don't want to be demeaning, but it's more the paperwork stuff. It's more that, you know, he would be involved in, I don't know, being a sorter out. Sounds terrible, awful phrase. Whereas Manga is more of, you know, he manages a scouting network. He will be involved in choosing the players that we sign, deciding which ones go, appointing a manager, working with the academy. So he would be very much at the coalface. Whereas my understanding is Girata is more to one side, sorting things out once they've been agreed. So,
okay,
I'm guessing, but I would think long we're only going to end up with one of the two. And obviously, by the fact that Manga's done a lot of talking, it would suggest that at some point, you know, Girata may well depart. But I haven't really been able to answer that very clearly because no one's ever really explained to me what the two roles are. But, you know, I see them both at games and they seem happy chatting away. Again, I can only relate it to what most of us go through in our jobs. You know, if you started a new job and you knew that you had the responsibility of someone else who'd been there for a while, then you're sort of guessing that in the end that other person's probably going to go off and do something else. And I think that's probably where we're at. Again, it may be something that sorts itself out one. in terms of who's got the nap hand and who's in control, then it's definitely Manga.
Moving on to another one. Oh, sorry, go on, Charlie.
I was just going to say, you mentioned that Manga kind of insinuated that there will be a lot of change in the summer, and obviously that's something that the fans are crying out for. How much change do you imagine could happen? I'm hearing some fans saying, oh, we want to get rid of 80, 90% of the players, stuff like that, which I think is quite unrealistic. I don't know if you know too much about what the budget might look like next year, and I'm trying to think of what Burnley did. They got rid of 11 first-team players last season, and they brought in about 20 in total. So do you envision it will be that kind of volume of change?
The first thing you have to look at is if players are under contract, then moving them on is far harder than if their contract has run out. Now, and Watford have been guilty of giving quite long contracts to people who probably wouldn't have got long contracts anywhere else. Certainly people who are in the twilight of their careers. It's lovely if you want to move 10 players on and all 10 want to go, and there's someone who, I think some of our players, it might be quite hard to move on just because, they're on decent remuneration with Watford and they've got maybe a year or two to go and no other club wants to pay them that much. I mean, if you look back to when we had Danny Rose, we ended up settling his contract because no one wanted to take that sort of contract on and he wasn't really keen to take a pay cut. And so you can settle up with players. It's a bit of a false economy though, because all you're doing is paying them that you would have paid if they'd been there. You're basically paying them to go away, which in some instances can be a good thing if you think they've got a negative effect on the training ground or if you think they're just not going to be involved. I haven't dug in yet to whose contract is up. I think the obvious ones you've got to look at is the ones who are going to attract a decent transfer fee. So, I asked Ben and he gave me a quite sort of political answer that, we haven't set our mind on selling anybody and they're in our plans. But, it would be quite surprising if Sarr, Pedro, Louza, people who could command a fee were still here next season. I mean, I was surprised that both Sarr and Pedro, I'd sort of come to the understand last summer that one of those two would go. And it seems like we sort of gambled on keeping him to see if he could get us up, and that's sort of blown up in our faces a little bit. Sarr's contract's only got a year left. I can't imagine he's going to sign a new one, in which case, I would think he will be one of the first ones out the door. Pedro is obviously our biggest asset. We know that last year Newcastle were very keen. I shouldn't think they'd be the only ones. He's 21. He plays in a number 10 role, which is much sought after. He's physically strong. He's captain the team. Yeah, it'd be a real surprise if he stayed. The reason I say Louza is Louza signed a new contract during the season. Generally, when you do that, it's so that when it comes to transfer time, Watford have got a bit more negotiating clout. Again, he's a full international. He's relatively young. From his point of view, as with Pedro and Sarr, they're going to think, well, do I want another season in the Championship because it's going to affect my international career? But, I've got no problem with players who want to play at the highest level. And becomes a great player somewhere else. It's only, I think back to when I was a kid and John Barnes left to go to Liverpool, and you're devastated. Oh God! But when you look back on it, Watford played a part in his development. He was a Watford player. We found him. That happens. Watford are never going to be a club that can keep hold of its best players. You have to find the right time to sell. And I think when you look back last summer, people said, why did we let Emmanuel Dennis go? Well, we didn't get bad money for a guy who's not really been a starter at Nottingham Forest. And, I know for a fact that his agent was trying to get him a move in January. So, I think Watford were quite smart there. And had we gone up this season because we'd kept Pedro and Sarr, people would say that was genius. Because we haven't gone up, it now looks like we've missed out on some money. But, we'll still get, I think Pedro will command a decent fee. Sarr, maybe not quite as much as people might expect. I think Louza would command a decent fee. And I'm sure there's others in there we could sell. But I don't know what we call a high turnover. I mean, I'd be surprised if we did a Nottingham Forest and, sort of shipped 20 players in.
So but just to jump in there, would it be something similar to when I think of high turnover under the Pozzos, I think first season under Zola?
I don't think it'd be like that. I mean, that I think that was a case of, if I remember rightly, we sort of brought in about a dozen players on loan from Udinese, quite, sort of very late on. And I think, to be fair to the owner, he came in and had bought the club, and that was the solution to a problem where, we haven't got a very good squad, and, we got those players on loan. They were excellent. Abdi, but I think Abdi was there. Vidra.
I think
No, come back.
He cut out on Alman Abdi, and I'm just there reminiscing.
No, what I was going to say was, it comes back to the problem I said earlier, that if you want to turn players over, you've got to be able to get rid of them out of your club, and that either means selling them or buying them out of their contract. So I'd be surprised if we're going to bring 15 players. Well, I'm sure the loan rules have changed. I mean, I'm sure the Ian Holloway effect means that we'll never be able to do that again. But yeah,
Oh, we're dipping it out.
Come back.
To be fair, the turnover, how many players was that? That was 12 that season. Granada, Udinese. Yeah, it probably won't be that many, but it'll probably be more leaving, right, Charlie, than coming in, I'd imagine.
Yeah, I just think, like Andrew's saying, it's really hard it's going to be hard to get rid of the amount of players. Yeah, we got you back.
Yeah, sorry about that. I'm not doing anything. So I'm not changing anything.
We're going to have to start these announcement videos. Andrew's back in the call.
I'm a bit of a Luddite. I just turn it on. You send me a... So anything that's happening is down to Sky's Wi-Fi and not me. So yeah, I think there'll be a fair turnover of players, but we have to create gaps in the squad. And if you look at the squad list, and then what I'll need to do at some point is look through and see, okay, who's out of contract, who isn't, who might we be able to sell. But those three names come to mind straight away. That I'd be very surprised if Saar, Pedro, and Loser don't move on in the summer. Beyond that, you'd have to look through the squad and see, well, who might want to move. Where do we want? I mean, we've got what, potentially 4 right backs now. If you say, Andrews, Ngakia, Ferreira, Gaspar, so you sort of think, well, okay, we probably don't need 4 of those. But then we've only got one recognised, well, maybe 2 recognised left backs. But then Kamara will be going back to. We'll be heading off to Udinese at the end of his loan. I can't even get into that. So, I think you'd like to think that what Ben and whoever the head coach is will look at it and go, okay, if we are going to turn over here, let's not get ourselves in a position where we end up with 4 right backs, but only 1 recognised left back. It's got to be some planning. And I think that's what's happened in this 6 months. I think, Ben has talked to Bilic, he would have talked to Chris Wilder, he'd have talked to other people at the club. He'll have his ideas on where the gaps are, and he'll also know where we might be able to make some money. In terms of will that money be invested, Ben said the other day, that there will be money to spend. I think we have to be mindful that we're a club that's got a lot of debt. I think 124 was the figure in the accounts. So some of that is owner debt, which is less of a problem because, owner debt generally you really only have to worry about when it comes to selling the club. So it's a bit like your mortgage, it's money that you don't really have to pay back until it comes to selling your house. But there's £77 million of bank debt there that we're going to need to start sorting out. We've got 1 more year of parachute money. After that ends. So at the end of next season, if we haven't gone up, then we are pretty much only spending what we can bring in. And some of that parachute money we've taken loans against, and some of the TV money we've taken loans against. So financially, while we're not, it's not like we're on the brink. I remember being there when, Graham Simpson and Tim Shaw went to training ground and asked the players to take a pay cut, and that was a day where you think, well, if they say no, we're going to shut. It's not like that, but you can't ignore it. You can kick the can down the road a bit, but you've got to think that at some point we've got to sort that debt out. If at some point the owner decided to sell, that debt could be wiped out very quickly. But that also affects your potential to sell because anyone who comes and wants to buy the club is going to have to take on the owner's £47 million debt and the bank debt of 77. So there's 124 million before you even get into, and I'm going to have to pay you something to own the club as well. So if we do make good money from these transfers, it would be good housekeeping from the club to take a large chunk of it and try and sort out some of the debt. May not be what the fans want, may not mean, it probably won't mean that if we sell a player for 20 million, we're going to invest 20 million, because you have to do your diligence and say, well, I owe a lot of money, as we all do. If in our house, in our lifestyles, if you make a bit of money, you can't say, well, I'm going to go and spend it all on expensive trainers and clothes when you owe the energy company money, that someone's going to come knocking at the door and say, you owe us a bit before we spend anything else. So I think we have to be realistic that any money we make this summer, a chunk of it will have to go into other places. But Ben did say that money would be reinvested. It's just how much and what proportion of the amount that we bring in is given to him and the head coach. I think the other thing we have to remember is, you look at someone like Ryan Porteous, who I think has been a decent sign. I think given time, and a bit more time to adapt to the Championship and Watford's way, would be a very good player. Didn't cost a fortune. It's not like we went out and spent millions on him. That was hundreds of thousands rather than £1 million. Some of our best players have been ones that we haven't spent a lot of money on. And I think sometimes, we've forgotten that Watford as a club have a very good history of buying low and selling high. And when I think back over the years, very long time ago, I remember Watford blowing $500,000 on Jamie Morley when $500,000 was a lot of money. I remember Nathan Ellington, $4 million, $4.25 million, might as well have taken it and, put it down a drain. It doesn't always have to mean that you have to spend a lot of money. It's the way you spend it and how wise you use it. And so I'd like to think that with a good scouting network and someone in Manga who has got a track record of, finding those nuggets of gold in the dirt, that if he's not given a huge amount of money, that doesn't preclude us from being savvy in the transfer market. So, I want us to have the best team possible, but I'd also want to make sure that we've got a club that's able to move forward. And with a lot of debt, you have to have that in mind. So I think there'll be some reinvestment, but I don't think we're going to be selling players for 20 million and buying players for 20 million. I think those days are gone, certainly for now.
Yeah, for sure. Before we get back onto Ben, Andrew, just one question that I had, just with, I'd say, the growing Pozzo out sentiment that you're seeing at Vicarage Road and at the games at the moment. Obviously, there is quite a lot of stick being aimed at Gino, and people have been saying it, but is there actually, from what you understand, an alternative on the table at this point? Is there anyone who would be interested? Is there any sightings that might be investment? I mean, I'm very much putting on the spot here. It just came into my head because I know people have been saying, the people who have been kind of against Pozzo have been saying, well, what's the alternative on the table? So I just wanted to, if you knew anything about.
Well, the first thing I say is I can really understand why people feel the way they do. And while I wouldn't encourage anybody to do anything outrageous, I admire people who have the balls to go and carry a banner or show their discontent in a peaceful way. I don't really want to see, like we had in the 90s, where we had fans trying to break into the boardroom. But I think when you feel discontent, then you have the right to express that, and you should. And you'd like to think the people who you aim that discontent at take notice of it. So on that front, fair play to anyone who has the front to go and do that, because without those people, then anyone who's in control of the organization feels they can do anything because they're not accountable to anybody. So, the man with the towel and the guys who walked from the front of the stand, while it wasn't good to see, it was in as much as people are prepared and feel so strongly that they can voice and show what maybe others don't feel able to do. So do I think it will make a great deal of difference? Is there an offer on the table? What you have to think with, Pozzo out, it's not like saying, Bilic out or Edwards out or Wilder out. Owners don't sack themselves. He's not going to walk in one day and go, I'm so bad at being an owner. Yeah, you're right, I'm out. Because he owns the place. And as I said just now, anyone who wants to get involved and I'm not aware of anyone who wants to buy the club. But that a potential buyer would have to factor in that they've got to sort out before they even look at investing in the club. There's been talk in the past of investment from America. As I understand it, that wasn't individual investors. That was more of almost a fund that may want to get involved in the club on a lower level. But as with anything, if if I want Friday and I decide I want to go and whack, 25 million into Watford, I'm expecting something back. I want a share in the club. I want a voice at the table, and I don't know quite the appetite from the owner to do that, because if someone came to the owner and said, look, I want to take on half your debt, that person's going to want to have half the say in the club as well. They're not going to do it just because it's fun to do. Here's 70 million, do what you like with it. So if there is investment, or there is an investor, or there are people want to put money in, then the owner is going to have to give something back in return. And that will be the test of what he wants to do, is how much appetite he's got to let someone else have a say in the running the club. I don't know that he wants to sell, and I don't know if there's people.
He'll be back in a bit.
I'm back.
There we go.
I see these little spinning circles now, so I know I've disappeared. I was going to say that I think if there are people who are out there, they don't tend to come knocking on your door and going, "Hey, Watford, would you be interested in my 70 million?" It tends to be a bit the other way, and that's obviously what brought the American investment to the fore. Is I'm guessing, from what I know, is that they've sort of sanded out the American market, and there's funds there who might be interested in investing some money in you. It's all going to come down to what the owner wants. He's got the nap hand here. He owns the whole thing. And if he wants to pay that price, as I understand at the moment, there's no one sitting out there thinking, I've got 124 million, I'd like to go and buy Watford. But then conversely, Huddersfield have just been bought by some Americans who, and I, in no way would I want to be detrimental to Huddersfield. After all, they beat us. But in terms of an attractive investment, a club like Watford that's got a decent recent history, is close to London, has a very famous fan, and has got some assets, nice stadium, training ground, you'd think would be quite attractive to a potential investor. And so it's a bit chicken and egg. I think if there is going to be investment, at some point, someone at the club has got to sound people out, or the vibe's got to come out that Watford are looking for money. Because until then, I just, in my experience, people don't go, I represent person X and they're, a billionaire and they'd like to buy in. So the way things are, if we don't go up next season, which on the form of this season wouldn't be unsurprising, then the parachute money runs out, and then we are in a bit of a pickle, because we are then surviving on what we can generate ourselves. So the next year is going to be important on that front. I think it would be a healthy thing to see some fresh investors in the club. The owner may think completely differently. Sadly, I don't get a chance to ask him because he won't talk to me. But I'm looking forward to if and when the fan events happens, because while some people would be very understandably wanting to ask about players and managers, I'd love to ask the owner about what his get out plan is. Anyone who invested anything generally has a plan that they're going to be involved for so long, and at the end of it they want to sell up or move on. It's like anyone who invests in any business. You think, okay, I'm going to go in there for 5, 10, 15 years, we're going to do this and this. At the end of it, the money I invested will be worth more. I cash out and everybody's happy. I don't quite know where his his exit plan is at the moment, because we've now got a club that's pretty much a championship club, because it has been and it will be again next season, that could well be stripped of all its saleable assets. And although we've got a nice stadium and training ground, it's not like we, in 2019, we'd just been to the FA Cup final. We'd just finished top 10 of the Premier League, and we had a lot of very good players. At that point, Watford was a very attractive asset for an investor. Wind forward to where we are now, and we're a mid-table championship side that has got a lot of debt, and by the end of the summer may have sold 30, 40 million pounds worth of players. As an investor, you might still want to invest, but you're come down. If you were thinking of investing in Watford in 2019 and you're still thinking of it now, you're thinking, I'm going to get it for a lower price, because Watford is less attractive than it was 4 years ago. So a lot's going to depend on what people think we're worth, if the owner is interested in selling, if the owner is interested in someone investing, and then if they are wanting to invest, what they're going to give that investor, because no one's going to go and invest money in Watford for nothing in return. They're going to want something, a percentage of the club or whatever. I mean, if you think back to when very dark days when we sold the stadium and then leased it back, that was the way of raising money. And the person we sold the stadium to, obviously, helped us out by giving us money, but we paid them rent and eventually had to buy the club back off, buy the ground back off them. I wouldn't want to go down that route, but any investor who comes in is going to want something. You just don't give your money to somebody and go, that's fine, I'll see you in a couple of years. You're going to want to be in board meetings. You're going to want to have a say in how it's run. So, yeah, we are in a position where I think we're going to need some investment, or the owner might potentially want to sell. I don't know, but it's a bit chicken and egg until he makes his thoughts and desires a bit clearer. I don't think we're going to see a queue of people forming at the door.
So this is sorry, Charlie.
It sounds like all of our problems we need to get in the Premier League, and that's obviously what Ben's going to have a huge role in.
I wouldn't say that. I mean, you need to get in the Premier League for the revenue. Obviously, you go in the Premier League, the minute you step in the door, you've got a massive check comes in from Sky. But if you're going to rebuild a club, I mean, if you think Watford, when the Pozzos came, we were a mid-table Championship club, where we are now, really. And we suddenly, within 2 years, we were a Premier League club and we were up with the big boys again. It's sometimes easier to rebuild when you're a bit lower down. It's difficult to understand where the owner wants to go with it, because if he wanted to sell it, then the time to sell it was 2019, when we were, a really shiny thing, a bauble.
He probably thought at that time we were going to go up. Saar would be worth 70 million. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm sure if we all reread, all right, we'd been properly stuffed in the cup final, but we got to a cup final. We were, nowhere near relegation. We were a comfortable mid-table side. We all probably thought, yeah, we're going to kick on now. I remember thinking, that season, if we'd have done a bit better towards the end, we could have scrambled into 7th place and been in the Europa League. I think Burnley did that. So, it's easy to sit here now and go, oh, I could have seen that coming. Look, back in 2019, we thought, we had a really, really good club that was on the up. And maybe that's what the owner thought as well. But, football has a habit of biting you on the backside. And 4 years on, we're back almost where we started when he first came. But that doesn't mean we can't do it again. What I say to people is, if going back to your original point about the banners and the protests, if there's a message for the owner, Pozzo out isn't really a realistic one. But Pozzo change would be the one I'm looking at, is you're going to have to do something different, because the last 4 years you've done the same thing over and over and over again, and it's not worked. It did for 6 years. We were brilliant for 6 years. We were always, innovative, signing players. There was always something good and positive happening. And it's almost like the feeling has been, well, we'll just keep doing what we did for the first 6 years, and eventually it'll come right. Well, it hasn't. We've gone on a sort of a death spiral to the point where, it looks like we're going to finish below halfway in the Championship. Now, if you do what you did again, there's nothing to suggest it's going to get any better. You're going to have to do something different. And that doesn't have to be wholesale change. It just is a change in attitude and mindset. And, I remember last year, a lot of talk about the culture at the club. Well, that hasn't changed. It needs to change badly. There's so many things I could talk about in terms of performances, but the one thing that stuck in my mind that Chris Wilder said that I thought was absolutely spot on is there's no accountability for our players at the moment, because we have a culture where they can see that if things go wrong, the bloke who's picking the team gets the chop. So, and they've seen that happen 6 times in 2 seasons. If you create that culture in any workplace where if the team don't perform, the manager gets a chop, then where's the incentive for the team to perform? I'm not saying you can sack players, you can't, but there has to be some sort of culture at the place where there is accountability for those who don't put performances in. And that's the first change I think we need to make, is to, at the moment it feels like the players have got the club over a barrel, where, if they feel like playing, they do. If they don't, they don't. But it doesn't matter either way, because they won't pay any price. That is where we need to change. And that has to come from the top. And at the moment, we've got a culture where the players look at the owner and think, well, he just changes something. He's not really thinking long term. He's thinking short term. We've seen 6 managers come through the door and none of them are any good. I don't agree. I don't agree it's the managers. We've had the same set of players for 2 seasons. We've had a manager who had won the Premier League. We had an ex-England manager. We had the ex-manager of Croatia. We've had a manager who got Sheffield United to the Premier League. Forget the other 2. Those 4 haven't been able to get a tune out of this lot. So, if I was the owner, I'd be thinking, okay, it's probably not that the managers aren't working. There's something else. So that would be my message is, what do you need to change? Because it's not the manager. I think we can all agree on that. If you'd have put peak Alf Ramsey, Bobby Robson, Pep Guardiola in charge of our players at the moment, I don't know what difference it would make. So it's not changing the manager. So I think what the owner's got to do is he's got to change something, and he's got to look beyond keep changing the manager and look at what he's doing, or the way the club operates, or the culture it's got, or the structure, and say, well, there's something there that needs fine tuning. And until we do that, and if we don't do that, then what we've served up this year will be what we'll continue to serve up.
So, Andrew, one more question on Gino before. There's a couple, sorry to keep you, but there's a couple on Ben Manga. Some people are dropping me a DM saying, you've got to ask Andrew this question. Just one just came to my head, actually, and it feels like a lot of this could be solved with, as you know, having worked at both Charlton and Watford in PR and communication, a bit of communication from the owner and a sit down and a chat about what's happening. I think I wasn't on the last time he came on because I had an exam, I think, but I remember Sam asked the question about how close you were to getting to speak to Gino. You touched upon it there that he doesn't want to speak to you. Is that, what's happened there? Is there just no progression? It's very much just a firm no.
And are you involved? And are you involved in the up and coming fan committee? Is that something you're involved in as well?
No, I've not got involved in that because I'm not a fans group, and the club have made it clear that they're working with the fans group, and that's fine. If that delivers something that is good for the fans and gives them what they want, that's great. If the club want me to be involved, or they want the Watford Observer to be involved, we would. But I'm not going to walk in and say you need to listen to me. That would be me doing what I don't want other people to do, which is try and advocate an answer when you don't know what the problem is. If the club came and said, look, we've got a format we think is agreeable, but you can help, then great. Well, we will. But for now, it's the fans groups and the club. So I'm not involved in that, but I would be, and the Watford Observer would be if the club and the fans thought that would help. In terms of talking to the owner, obviously last summer I got to sit down with Scott, and we did a lot, and there was a lot of articles there. And the next natural step was to talk to the owner, and I did think we were very close at one point, and then I think if you look at the season, how the season's gone, and to be fair to the owner, it's far more attractive to talk to me if you're in the top 6 and you're knocking on the door of promotion than if you're 13th in the league and I'm manager number 3. So at the moment, I'm not holding out any hope that he wants to talk to me. I don't think it's a personal thing. I mean, other than the odd nod in a corridor, I don't even think I've heard his voice other than on TV. Obviously, he's got every chance to read what I write, and he may disagree with it. He may think I'm not pro him or not pro the club. Thing is, I'm not pro anything. I'm just pro what's best for Watford. So if Watford play well, I say they've played well. If they don't play well, I say that as well. If they make good decisions and bad decisions, I'll say what I think is right, and try to reflect what I think the fans think. If the owner doesn't like that, then I think it's not so much a judgment on what I say. It's maybe a judgment on how people feel about him. At the moment, he's seeing banners with his name on it that aren't very positive. That's nothing to do with me. I'd love to ask him what he thinks about it, but at the moment, he doesn't want to talk about it. He doesn't want to talk about anything. I'm encouraged that he wants to have this fan session. Like everybody else, I've got a degree of skepticism about how that might pan out. I've got lots of thoughts on it. I wouldn't be comfortable. I wouldn't think it's right to have something that's a private session that nobody can hear. But then similarly, with these sort of things, if an owner and a chief executive are going to be honest and open, then there'll be things said that, you may not want in an open forum. So it's a tricky one, but I think if he is going to talk to the fans, there has to be some way that everyone can get to hear it, whether that's or read it, whether that's, that it's edited down later on and shown as a video, whether, I sit in there and transcribe every single word as I do with Chris Wilder. If this is going to work, it has to be fully transparent and something that everyone can see and hear. And it can't be, if you want my thoughts, I think that any sort of event that the club organise needs to be a bit like Question Time on BBC, where you have your top table, which would be your owner and the chairman and perhaps the manager, Ben Manga, I don't know. And you have someone who's sort of like the facilitator, so your Fiona Bruce or David Dimbleby or Robin Day back in the day. And then you have a group of people in the room, and there are questions that come in, but they're not given to the people on the top table, they're given to the presenter, and the presenter then asks those questions on behalf of the public. And I know a little bit about Question Time because I helped work on an episode once, and the way they do it is they ask for questions in advance, but they're not vetted by the people who are attending. They're vetted by the presenter. So the presenter will look at it and go, hey, there's a hell of a lot of questions here about selling João Pedro. So I'm going to ask a question on behalf of all those people. So it's almost a straw poll, that rather than the club having the questions to vet, they need to be vetted by a third party, someone who's away from it. So that person walks in the room with a collection of cards that sort of sums up all the things that have come in, all the topics and questions. They then put them to the top table, but then you've got people in the room, a mixture of fans who can then cross-examine. So when the owner says something like, on Question Time, when a Tory MP or a Labour MP says it, and there's someone in the room who goes, oh, hang on a minute, I want to ask you something about that. Otherwise, it becomes a series of statements. What it has to be a Q&A, it has to be interactive. It has to be something where if someone gives an answer, you can interrogate that answer a bit more. And the presenter can do that, or the host, but so can people in the room. If it isn't like that, then it just becomes a party political broadcast for the Pozzo family. And that's not what anybody wants. It won't be any use to us. So that's my thoughts on it, is it needs to be a bit sort of Question Time-ish with access for everybody and no suggestion that anything's been vetted by anybody other than someone who is independent of the club. So it needs to be a club organised event, but hosted by and managed by someone who isn't the club. Because otherwise, it is a bit too in-house and a bit too comfortable. Yeah. If we do that, and we get the owner there, and the questions are what the public and what the fans want to ask, and they're then allowed to cross-examine those answers, I'd see that as a really big step forward. I would see that as far better than the owner sitting down with me and doing an interview. I'd love to do both. What in an ideal world I'd like to do is have that fan event, let people digest it, and then follow in with an interview, because then that's something that Manga talked about in what he said to me is I want us to be more open and communicative. That's great, Ben, but you need to have a word with your boss, because those are two words that don't really fit into his CV at the moment, because he's not very open or very communicative. So yeah, that I would love to interview the owner, not because I particularly feel I should do it, but because I think the fans have the right to hear his thoughts and know what his plans are, because that helps us to buy into it. If we knew what the plan was for next season and beyond that, we might not agree with it, but at least we know where we're going. At the moment, it feels like we're in a car and someone set the sat nav, but we don't know where they've set it to, or even what route we're taking, and or what might come along the way. And it feels like we're just going in the dark, So I really hope that this fan event is attended by the owner and he answers questions that haven't been set up to make life easy for him, and that he accepts that people may want to challenge his answers. And then I'd love to think that after that, we do more of it, even if he doesn't attend forums, is that we can have some way of him regularly responding or communicating, because I find it amazing that someone can own a business for 10 years and just not speak. Now, I'm sure he'll say, well, I've got a chairman who does that. Look, at the end of the day, we all know you own the place. It's your money that you've got 40 million pound in the game. We just like to hear from you. I'm not anti him, because I don't know what I could be anti, because I never heard from him. It might be that we hear from him and we go, wow, that's brilliant. We wish you told us that sooner. It might be that we hear from him and go, no, you're an absolute loon. You need to sell up quickly. We don't know. We were all in the dark, and I don't think many people do know what the plan is. But now we've got back. We have gone on a 10-year round trip that took in the Premier League, took in Wembley, took in players like Gerard Deulofeu, Roberto Pereira, and now we're back at the end of that 10 years, back in where we started, but just with a bit more debt. Okay, I think we need now, for the sake of everybody, to understand what the plan is, because none of us know. And I think the biggest indicator that the owner should look at is not the banners, it's not the pozzo out on a towel, it's not the chants, it's the number of people that were inside the stadium for the Cardiff game the other night. I can't remember the last time that I saw more seats than people at a Watford home game. That to see, look, I don't know, 10,500 people there. That's what the owner should look at. It's not how loud the chants are. It's not how many banners there are. It's that the people who are your most loyal devotees would rather sit at home on Wednesday night and watch something on Netflix than come and watch Watford. All right, forget the fact it was a dreadful performance. Forget the fact that we've been losing games. When people stop turning up, that's the biggest message the owner should take away, is that the people who think it's worth spending £400 on Watford actually don't even want the seat that they've bought for a home game. That's the big, if he looks at that and thinks that's not a problem, then I am worried, because that to me, when I worked at the clubs, if we had attendances that were dropping, that's the time we used to panic. Because once your diehards go, once your loyalists, I know season tickets are different, but God, if I paid for a ticket for the theatre, even if I didn't really fancy the show, I'd still go along.
Yeah.
I'd still go because I've paid for it. And when people have paid for something, they don't use it. That's such a level of disenfranchising that, I'd like to think the owner looks at that rather than the banners. As I say, I'm full of respect for people who are passionate enough to show that. But I think that if the owner doesn't feel the pain through his pocket of people not turning up, not buying programs, not buying a cup of coffee at half time because they're not even there, then I don't know what other message you can give. And it's going to be very interesting for the last game with Stoke, because I keep thinking, are they going to do a lap of honour?
This is the thing. What is it a lap
of? Are we going to have end of season awards? It'd be a brave person. I'd love to see the nominations for Player of the Season.
Jesus.
It's almost like it's going to be, you flip it around and go, who's been least bad?
God. I said, Andrew, that we should give it to you.
Yeah, I saw that, Jacob, and that was very kind. But I have missed a couple of games because I was on holiday, but I have been to every game and they've still not picked me. So I think that when Chris said last week, when he said last week he was going to make changes, I really thought that I was in. On a serious note, that all I can say is that when you come to things about the owner and the state of play at the moment, I think if the owner doesn't look at a half-empty stadium for a home game and think, oh, something's going wrong here, then I do worry. I don't know whether he does or not, because he doesn't communicate. But if that doesn't send alarm bells ringing to him, then I don't know what will.
Yeah, absolutely. We've kind of delved into the Gino chat, which we wanted to do with you today, Andrew, but there's a few more questions just on that Manga interview, and one that someone's pressing on me to ask is about so one here from George, and then there's one from Greg. So did Ben give any indication that he intends to use the EFL market and dip into leagues 1 and 2? And just Greg's question here, good to see you, Greg. Did he speak about his knowledge of the UK domestic market? And is Graham Younger, who is our head of UK scouting, reporting to him?
Right, well, I didn't ask about Graham Younger, so I can't answer that one. I was with him for an hour and a half, but as you can imagine, I had a whole page of A4 to get through.
Yeah.
So I didn't really dig down into whether Graham Younger reports to him. But Ben did say we can do this regularly, so I will. In terms of the EFL and everything else, I said to him, what's your knowledge of English football, bearing in mind you've always worked in Germany, and he pointed to his network and said, that our network goes beyond Germany, it goes into the British and English football, It goes into Europe. It goes into Africa, Asia. I can't remember exactly how he phrased it, but he said, if the player's right, we want, and the price is right, I don't really have too much of a problem with where they come from. But we do need a core of, sort of players who understand this league and understand English football, and a core. And within that core, we need 2 or 3 or 4 senior players who get it. And I think this, but when we were talking sort of just casually, when you look at the Watford decision, the fact that we've had to give the captaincy to a 21-year-old Brazilian who is a very, very good player, but there's a complete lack of leaders within that squad. We haven't really got too many players who you would give the armband to, that people would think, yeah, I can see why he's giving them that. I think we need to get back to the days of having a Troy Deeney or a John Eustace or a Will Frostrin, if you're old enough, or a Pat Rice. There's someone who gets the armband because they've been there and seen it and done it, and you follow them out of respect. So he didn't say, look, I'm going to go down and milk all the best players out of League One. What he said was he wanted players of the right mindset and the right type, and within that there needs to be a mix of young and old, homegrown British players who understand the British league, and others. He was very keen on the academy. I know from talking to Richard Johnson that they've had several conversations about academy players, and while it was to see the likes of Adrian Blake on Saturday, when people say, and I've seen the messages, people saying, "Oh, that means they're off." It doesn't mean that. And when you see stories that Adrian Blake is linked with other clubs, and so is Harry Amas, and I'm hopefully going to write something either this week or next week about the state of play with some of their young players. Nothing has been decided. You have to remember that all these players that are under 18, until they get to 18, they can't sign a pro contract with anybody anyway. And I know in the case of Blake and Amas and others, they've been offered contracts by Watford. So if they do go somewhere, it's not because Watford haven't offered them something. It'll be because they think that they would rather go and play for Manchester United or wherever it might be. But to say that, well, there's no point blaming Blake because he's going, that isn't the case. Manga was very, very keen on bringing our own players through because it is a much cheaper option. The cost of developing a player in the academy and bringing him into the first team is far less than it is of going and signing someone from Colombia and paying a transfer fee, even if that fee is less than the British market. I mean, one thing that Ben did talk about, I don't know if we referenced it in the articles, was unfortunately at the moment, the British market is about the most expensive to sign players from, because of the money that's there from Sky, and because it's seen as the sexy, cool league where all the players are. If you go down to League One and you take, I don't know, as I said, someone from Sheffield Wednesday or Plymouth or Ipswich who are doing really well, you'd probably end up paying more for someone who's 24 without international caps than you would if you went and signed a player from Europe who's got 20 caps for their country. The difference is obviously the player from Ipswich or Plymouth will understand the league more, but you have to balance that out. Do you want to go and spend 5 million on a bloke who's maybe scored 20 goals in League One, but he's untried just because he's played in League One? And that's where I'm putting a bit of faith in Ben. He spoke very well about the need for balance and having the right mix of things, young and old, homegrown and overseas, experienced and inexperienced academy players. That's why, I'm clinging on to the hope that we are going to let him have time to do and deploy the things that he's talking about, because it made a lot of sense. What wouldn't make sense would be to bring Manga in, let him talk like he's done, and then if in September things aren't going well, to undermine him and pull the rug out from under his feet, which is what we did a year ago with Rob Edwards, which comes back to what I said earlier. If you keep doing the things you're doing and they're not working, don't be surprised if they continue not to work. So we have to put some faith in Manga. Why appoint him, and why tell him or let him have this sort of structure if we don't give him time to deploy it? Because, even he said, it's not going to be fixed overnight. Just because Ben Manga or anybody else walks in with a great track record and a good idea, it's not going to be like we go out in August and we're storming through the league and, HMS Premiership is set sail. It's, talking to Chris Wilder and talking to other people I know in football, they don't believe it takes 18 months. They all say the same thing. If you had one good pre-season where you allowed people who you've put in a position of power, like a manager, like a technical director, to do the things they think is right. And you took a step back and said, right, I'm going to leave you guys to it because I've appointed you because you know better than me. That summer could be enough to have you ready. If you look at Burnley, they came down with us and they allowed Vincent Kompany and whoever works with him to do what they wanted. And there was a massively high turnover of players. And if I remember rightly, they didn't make the greatest start in the world. We beat them, and I think they were knocking around in mid-table. Now at Watford, that would have been enough for you to be sacked. Probably you'd have been gone. But Burnley have since then. I mean, all right, putting aside the mysterious defeat to QPR on Saturday, they've absolutely walked through this league backwards without any bother at all. If in August or September, when they were mid-table and they'd lost to us, would someone like Pozzo have sacked Kompany at that point? It seems mad, but that's we are going to have to at some point, I think, say, okay, we've got a technical director and he's appointed a manager and these two guys know what they're doing and I'm going to lead them to it. And even if things don't go well, I'm going to trust them that they know what they're doing long term. That's the biggest change. When I say about Pozzo change, that's what has to change, is this knee-jerk, trigger-happy, first whiff of trouble, I'm going to know better than you. Because one thing Ben did make clear was, if he feels like he's not being listened to, or people are trying to force things upon him, he'll go. I think we've done quite well to land him. I think it's a really good capture for us. But he doesn't need to be here. If he decided to leave, I don't think he'd be out of work very long. So the acid test will be the first time things don't go perfectly under the new structure. And Ben said himself, we will lose games. We're not going to go into August next year and just start winning every week. And it's not going to be like that. But you've got to look at beyond the results, like Burnley did, and say, okay, we've not had the greatest start in the world, but we trust in Vincent Kompany and we trust in what he's done. And look at where it's gotten. It must be lovely to be. I mean, that must be the greatest season for a Burnley fan, where you just literally you're planning for the Premier League from Christmas onwards. So, in answer to the question, I think Manga knows exactly what he thinks will work, and I'd like to think that Pozzo's appointed him because he believes in what Manga can do. So, if Manga thinks we need some homegrown players, some English players, some from Europe, some who are over 30, some are under 30. Let's all give him a chance to show that works. Because, to be honest, it can't be any worse than this season. And I never thought that that this season would be worse than last season, and it hasn't been in terms of results. But there's a big difference between going to Man City and getting done 8-0 to losing at home to Cardiff, losing at home to Huddersfield. It's just awful. So, that's the thing I really hope that comes out of all this is change, and let people who you've appointed, who you think know more than you, crack on. And if it doesn't start perfectly, don't feel you need to react, because the lesson is, look at Burnley. Burnley put their faith in Kompany. He sold a lot of players. He signed a lot of players. They didn't make an awesome start, but they've walked through the Championship, and they will probably be very, very good again next season. And, if Kompany decides to go and join Chelsea or Tottenham, while Burnley may be gutted that he goes, what an indication of how good a job he's done and what a wise move it was by Burnley. Because, I don't see too many of the managers that we have going on to big things. It's generally they come to us, and that sort of like puts your career on hold. So I know the question was about players. I'm just, having met Ben and talked to him, if he thinks this is the right thing to do, then we should give him the time to implement that. And I think he will look in all markets. He'll look for value. He'll look for players that fit the right shape he want to play, the right characters, and he's going to, I presume, appoint a head coach who fits in with all that. Let's put some trust in them and give them some time, because if we don't, if the fans clamour for change at the first hint of trouble, then we're playing into the owner's hands, because he'll say, well, you want change. I've given you change. So, it's no good us saying to the owner, please be a bit more patient. Please give us some time. Please don't keep doing this, if we don't buy into the the project ourselves. So that's what I hope, is that whoever we sign, whatever head coach we have, whatever group of players we get, is that all of us give them some time to prove their worth before we do something that makes the owner go, well, you wanted it. There you go. There's your change.
Yeah, absolutely. Questions are rolling in. I mean, Andrew, this is record figures, I think, on WD18. One of the, I think it actually kind of shows how desperate the Watford fans are just to have a bit of clarity of what's going on, if I'm completely honest. One of the questions,
I haven't really given you much clarity. It's all been my opinion.
No, but I think just hearing different perspective, and also I think a lot of fans are, from what I've been seeing in the comment section, agreeing with what you're saying, and it's nice to know that someone who's lived and breathed it this season is also thinking the exact way that I think a number of fans are feeling. And one of the questions that Geordie put, which was about an hour ago, so I do apologise, Geordie, and one man we haven't mentioned: will Scott Duxbury stay out of football now that we have Ben Manga? So we mentioned Gino, we mentioned Girata, we mentioned Manga. Scott Duxbury, do you know anything on his position now?
To the best of my knowledge, the impact or the involvement that Scott has in football hasn't changed over the seasons. He will be involved in finalising contracts. He will be involved in negotiations with agents, but he's never had a role that's similar to Ben Manga's. He's never, he basically runs the business side of the football, but part of that will always involve the football side of it because we have to sign and sell players. I know that when Rob Edwards left, Scott was quite influential in bringing Slaven Bilic in, but not to the point where he went off and did it unilaterally. He just felt that Bilic was a good fit for what we needed at the time, and the owner agreed, and so Bilic was appointed. As I say, I've been doing this job nearly a year now. I've not seen any signs that Scott is, involved with the football side of things any more than he ever was, or that he's going to be any less now that Manga's here. I think you'll see a lot more of Ben Manga says than you maybe will see of Scott Duxbury says. But then I don't think that's a bad thing, because if Ben Manga is going to be the man who's going to be the sort of conduit between the football side of things and the board, then you'll be hearing from the person who's closest to it and is on both sides of the fence. I think Scott lets be quite relieved in a way that there's someone else there that can take the flak, and can answer the questions. And if you think back to when Scott, if I should have copyrighted "Come Hell or High Water," because I could have made a fortune out of that. But when he said those things, I've nothing at the time or since has made me think he didn't believe it. It wasn't like he said that for the bants, and that he knew that something coming down the line was going to make him look like he hadn't got a clue. He was fully bought into the Rob Edwards idea. He truly believed that Rob Edwards would be around for a while and that we would build a club around him. I don't think for 1 minute he thought that by the first international break that Edwards would go. And when he said it because he genuinely believed it. And no one in life wants to be made to look a bit of a fool. But that was what the owner did. He basically, sort of burnt Scott's words within 8 weeks of him saying them. What I hope is that we're not in the same position with Ben Manga in 8 weeks, where something happens where it looks like, well, Ben said one thing, but the owner thought something else. I keep coming around to the same point. Now we've appointed Manga. Now we've got someone who has got a track record of scouting, doesn't use agents too much, understands football, has got a great network, has been very successful. Let's not tear it up after 2 months just because we haven't won every game. The time to judge isn't going to be in September. It's probably not even going to be in December. Ben said himself, I can't promise that we're going to go up next season, but what I can promise is you'll see change. And I think that's all we want to see, isn't it, as fans, is that there's a direction of travel that we all agree with. What would complement it would be if the owner gave us an idea of where the club is going. So we've seen from Ben Manga where the football side of things are going. More scouting, less agents, more emphasis on the academy, more players who want to play for the club with the right attitude. That's where the football side of things is going. it would be nice to hear from the owner where the business and the club is going. So while we, because they go in tandem. If the team's doing well, then the club is going to do well. So how are we going to build? Are we going to extend the stadium? What is the plan? We've heard from the football side of things. What we're missing is the bigger club side of things. And I don't know if Scott's going to speak too much. I'm in touch with him, and every now and then, I'll get some information back from him. I don't blame him for not saying too much, because that must have been a pretty, chastening experience to throw your weight behind a manager who then gets the chop by the first international break. And I think that is hard to come back from. And I know a lot of people, are very critical of Scott, but I've always found him to be very good to deal with and very open and honest. And that must sting when you sort of see what you've said completely set fire to very quickly after you said it. And I'm not surprised he's been a bit quiet. And I think it helps him that Manga's around, because he won't have to do too much of the talking. So I don't think you'll see any change. And I think people who think that Scott is massively involved in the football side of things have got a bit of the wrong idea. He's the chairman, he's the chief executive, but and he will sit in on meetings with managers, but he's, as far as I know, he's not doing anything other than acting upon the wishes of the manager or the chairman. It's not like he's knocking on the manager's door and saying, you need to go 3 at the back, mate, because it's just not working. I don't think you'll see any change at all, and that wouldn't surprise me. He's not been a key influencer in the football side of things, and so that isn't going to change.
Just wrapping up, Andrew. One more question. James, and this is actually just about your coverage in general, looking ahead to next season, this pre-season. James asks, how much access will Andrew have in off pre-season, and how much insight will he be able to give of the ongoings of the club over the summer?
Well, thinking back to last summer, I had access to the chairman, and I had access to Rob, and we had those sort of odd behind closed doors pre-season friendlies, and I went to those, and I got access to the players. I mean, it feels like ages ago now, but there was obviously the Dan Gosling interview that sort of set a few markers. And
infamous.
Yeah, it was quite funny. The Sun ran it again the other day. I saw a headline saying, Watford player slam, and then I read it. I thought, well, that was 9 months ago. So I did send a little message to the Sun and say, look, if you're going to rehash my stories, at least don't try and say that it happened yesterday, because it didn't happen 9 months ago. Unless the club changed their mind, I've had very, very good access, and I've got no complaints at all. If they've ever said no to anything I've asked for, they've always explained why. So as an example, when I asked to speak to Ben in December, the message came back that he wanted some time. Totally understand that. And they were good to their word. And I spoke to him last week. I've never had a knockback on any of the players I wanted to talk to. And when I've spoken to players, it's never been vetted. It's never been like someone's been sat there going, no, you can't say this. It's been, warts and all. And I admire the club for that. And, when I worked there, I'd have been a bit nervous about doing that, because, certainly the Dan Gosling exercise showed that if you give a player a chance, they will say exactly what's in their head. I thought that was a good thing. I don't think there'll be any more of those. I'd like to think that, most of the bad eggs and rotten eggs are gone. And if they haven't gone, they'll certainly be gone by the start of next season. So hopefully nothing will change. Because of finances, if the club decide to go on a nice pre-season trip abroad, I doubt I'll be going with them, unless either they want to pay for me to go, or, we all want to chip in and give me a tenner and get me some Ryanair flights out there.
Get the GoFundMe page going.
Sorry?
We'll get the GoFundMe page started.
Yeah. The trouble is, if you've got a good amount of money, I'd probably want to go somewhere else. I wouldn't want to do. I don't really want to do a week in Spain watching footballers train. I'd much rather go somewhere else. But yeah, I don't see any change. The club, as I say, have been really good, and have always, even down to this week when we had to go through the sort of prickly subject of banners being confiscated and people being told that there was, there wasn't freedom of speech in the stadium. At least they dealt with it, and I always say to people, you may not like what the club say, you may not believe their answer, you may not agree with it, but you can't deny that they've dealt with it. And it isn't always going to be straight away. So, the day after the first banner appeared, people saying, "Where's the story?" You can't always do that. You can't always write a story the next day. It takes time, and you've got to give the club time to understand what went wrong, because things definitely went wrong there. You shouldn't be having people ejected from the ground because they're carrying a banner. And while they may not say it publicly, I know that privately they've looked at things and sort of reassessed and thought, yeah, maybe we didn't get that right, and maybe we could have done things differently. And that's a good power for the local paper to have, is they can shine a light on things and say, look, on behalf of the fans, we're asking you these questions and we don't think this is right. What's your response? And we may not always get an answer to everything, but just by asking the questions, it lets the club know that the fans aren't happy, and that as a body, the local paper thinks that the fans have got a point. So I can't complain, other than the owner not wanting to talk. And, I stress again, that's not because I think he owes, or because I think the club, should make him speak to me. I think he should want to communicate with the fans. And I think the local paper is a good way of doing that. Like I say, if we have a good fan event that is structured and managed in a way that it can't be seen as being totally contrived, that would be a really good start. But in terms of access, I don't think anything will change. I'm still going to be popping down to the under-21s tomorrow because I'm that sad. And I've got nothing better to do on a Monday. I'm going to start, hopefully, to interview a few of the club's younger players, so that through the summer, there'll be, we'll talk to some of the players that maybe haven't, been on the fringe of things. So tomorrow I'm talking to George Abbott. Hopefully I can do Toby Adeyemo, Jack Greaves, Adrian Blake, Ryan Andrews, some of the players who maybe haven't even made the first team, so that by the time next summer, the next season starts, we'll know as much about the homegrown players as we do about the ones that we sign. And every time we sign a player, I'll always request to speak to them. I've not been turned down before. And I'll try as best I can to ask whoever I speak to the questions that a fan would ask, because that's what I am. I'm just a fan who's got a platform, and the same as you guys have. And, that's what's always in my mind whenever I do these interviews is, okay, there's things I'd like to ask from a journalistic point of view, but there's also things I want to ask just from a fan point of view. Some of it is a bit fanish. Sometimes you ask a question, you think, oh, sounded just like a fan. But then you remember, yeah, that's what I am. I'm a fan. I'm a fan. I've been a fan for 40 odd years. So I am interested in things that fans are interested in. As much as I want to know about the finances of the club and how the club's run, I'm interested in how Ryan Andrews felt when he got applauded off the other night against Cardiff. What a great feeling for a kid who's been with the club for all his life. So, yeah, hopefully, in answer to James's question, nothing will change. And I know we'll talk the thorny issue of, do you have to subscribe to read the Watford Observer? No, you don't. You can still read stuff for free, but not everything will be free. So depending on what the story is, the way the website's structured is, if Gino Pozzo decided to do an interview, then that probably you would need a subscription to see most of that. And I think that's sort of understandable. And it comes back to, I've said this to a few people, when the Watford Observer was only in print, no one gave it away. You had to pay your 40p for it on a Friday afternoon, whenever you went and got it. If you buy Sky TV and you want the Sky Sports channels, you've got to pay a bit more to get those. And what, without putting too fine a point on it, the time and effort that goes into it from me and from the paper generally, you have to get something back. I can't go down to my bank manager and say, look, I'm not paying my mortgage this month. Here's some messages I got from fans to say I'm doing a really good job. It's not going to cut much ice. So, that subscription money does mean that we can do the level of coverage we do. And I'm quite proud of what we do. We do a lot of coverage of everything. First team, youth team, under 21s, interviews. I'd like to think that it's worth the subscription, but you don't have to, and I wouldn't force anybody to. And there will always be stuff that you can read for free. So on a match day, I blog from every game, no subscription needed. I got some hilarious comments on Saturday, brightened my day. Some of the comments that were made, and I always try and interact with that sort of thing. So blogs and that will be free. There'll always be stories that will be free. But as we get more and more sort of in access stuff that we get access to, and the interviews and that, I don't think it's too much to ask people to pay a small amount to be able to see absolutely everything. And when I say small, I think at the moment You
Six,
get
£6, isn't it?
So it's £1 a month. So it's 25p a week. The
And
papers.
support your local, like in it.
Well, I understand. You know, there's someone yesterday. I can't remember his name. Said to me, you know, it should be free for all. And I so wanted to say, I don't know what you do for a living, but let's all follow that mantra through. You know, I'll say to my window cleaner, well, you know, I think you should clean my windows for free, mate. You know, go down. You know, go down to the pub and say, I don't really want a whole pint. I just want a bit of a pint. So do you mind if I have that for nothing? You'd get laughed out of the place. You know, there is a price for everything. And while I wouldn't force people to pay it, all I'd say is it's not a great amount. You are helping us better do these things. And you know, if people don't subscribe, then there will come a point when, you know, maybe I can't do it anymore, and you'll go back to the level of coverage we used to have. You know, I like to think we've moved things forward a long way in a year, and not just in what, you know, stories that are written, things like this. You know, coming onto the podcast and other things I do. You know, that I don't have to do that. That's just me wanting to do it. You know, I enjoy it, and I think it's a good thing. But it's all time and effort, and you know. So when I say to people it's £1 for a month, I don't think that's a great deal to ask. I really don't, you know. But I totally respect the people who don't want to, and I'll always try and make stuff available for people who don't subscribe. But you know, with the level of coverage we do, I mean, I think I counted up. I usually do about 12 to 20,000 words a week. You know, I think asking to pay £1 towards that each month isn't a great deal, but I can't force people.
No, I completely agree, Andrew. I mean, from my perspective, I've signed up, and this, I mean, to anyone who hasn't, it is 6 months for £6 to subscribe to the Watford Observer. We'll put a link in the description below. I mean, I can't speak highly enough of Andrew and what he's brought to the coverage of Watford. Just taking it to another level, and the access that he's bringing is something that I know a lot of clubs would love to see. So, yeah, we're so grateful to have you, Andrew, and so grateful to have you on the show today, mate. It's been an absolute pleasure.
I love it, and I love interacting with people, and you know, I do try on Twitter. And one thing I pride myself on is I won't get angry, and you can say what you like, and you know, people do say what they like, and I get some very aggressive DMs. But see people at games, you know, sometimes people say hello, Andrew, and I think I don't know who you are, but then you sort of realise, okay, they might recognise my face or something, but I'd always stop and have a chat. You know, I just think that's part of it. That it goes back to when, you know, I worked with Ollie, and he used to teach me about, you know, the importance of building those relationships, not just with the club owner and the players, but with people who travel to away games, and people who go to under 21 games, and people who, when you come out of the ground after a home game, they're still there because they want to see the players. Then in relationship with those is as important as it is with anybody else. So I'm always happy to do this sort of thing. And, you know, as long as people understand, I don't know the answer to every question, and sometimes it just be my opinion. But if people find that interesting, it adds a bit of value, and they find it entertaining, then that's great. You know, then I'm happy, they're happy, and we all get a bit more out of supporting Watford, which is at the moment what we need.
Absolutely. We'll leave the link to the subscription offer in the link below. We'll also leave the links to Andrew's pieces with Ben Manga, which covers from rumours to agents to players. Everything's in there. So, yeah, make sure you do click the link below. Charlie, it's been an absolute pleasure. Andrew, thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who watched today. We really do appreciate it. Some great comments, some great questions. Hopefully you enjoyed. And, yeah, we'll see you in the next one. Cheers, guys. Up the audits.